Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing Millennials. I'm Tamara and I'm stepping in as your guest host while Daniel's out on paternity leave. I'm a career product marketing leader and the former VP of PMM at high-growth startups like Kajabi and Unbounce. Now, I'm the founder of PMM Camp, a community and newsletter for product marketing leaders. And while Daniel's off doing dad things, I'll be here bringing you fun conversations with some of the smartest marketers I know. Joining me today is Haley Janicek, the head of creator community at Kit, an email marketing platform for creators. Haley is one of the most thoughtful marketers I know when it comes to blending product, community, and experience. I recently had the pleasure of attending Craft and Commerce, an event she helped to bring to life, and it reminded me just how powerful those offline moments can be. And so today's episode is all about the difference between online and offline experiences and how to design each with intention. We'll dig into what each format is best suited for, how to create moments that actually stick in people's minds, and why the most powerful brand experiences don't always feel like marketing. Haley shares how Kit thinks about fostering real connection with customers and how those moments strengthen not just the brand, but the community too. Haley, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am really excited for this episode. This is one of the ones I was really anticipating recording. I was just at an event that you hosted not so long ago, so I'm really excited to dig into all things events today. And so I want to start us off just by talking about online and offline, because I think nowadays almost all of marketing happens online, but we're seeing a really strong pull back to offline. Why do you think we're seeing that pull? And what do you think that says about what people are craving right now?
Yeah, you know what's funny? It's I think it's different today than it was right after, we'll say, the COVID. Are we allowed to say that now? Following COVID, it was one of those things where it was everybody was craving, right? The Surgeon General came out and said, we're in a loneliness epidemic. And it was just everybody wanted human connection again. And now I think with, the use of AI, everybody's thinking what actually is human? And the reality is that I think there's always going to be waves around what's causing people to want to be in person, but it's actually the most natural way that humans connect is being in person. And I think that we're always just going to crave it, no matter what.
I think that's really fair. And when I was down at Craft and Commerce, I was actually there a few days early participating in Jay Klaus's The Lab offline, which was awesome. And Jay actually started that event with a slide where he put up, this is what I think online events or online connections really great at. This is what I think offline events and offline connections really great at. And it was kind of, a pausing moment for me where I was even in my own community, I was thinking about, that makes a lot of sense. But I know you've thought a lot about this. So in your perspective, are there certain types of either learning or interaction or experiences that just suit offline rather than online and vice versa?
Yeah, I think I'm curious what Jay said, what he actually, what the slide said. So you'll have to tell me about that afterwards. But here's the thing. I think online is meant for scale and repeated touch points. And I think that offline is meant for deeper connections. And so offline, I just don't think that you can have there's so much nuance to being in person, right? There's body language and true excitement. When you get to hug a friend that you met online for the first time in person, how much more deep does your relationship become over time, right?
Yeah.
It's usually that tipping point from taking a friendship or a work relationship to a much deeper level usually happens once you guys have met in person. And so I think online is really good for scale and really good for repeated touch points. And I think offline is really good for really increasing that deeper relationship that's necessary to take something to the next level.
I love that. I always say one of my favorite things in the world is making an online friend an offline friend.
Yes.
And my partner does not work in the online space at all. And he always thinks it's just absolutely bizarre that I even have online friends that are real friends, right? But it's true. It's oh my God, I have seen you and talked to you so many times on LinkedIn or at these events. And just the hug, it really does create that extra level of bond. So at Jay's event, so what he did have was very similar to what you're saying. Also, though, he talked a lot about teaching style and how online is really great for like, let's say like one-to-many kind of teaching. So, hey, I'm going to teach you this course, or I'm going to walk you through a framework, versus the in-person being much better for discussion of those topics. So I think you're getting at that with the breadth versus depth piece. So at Jay's event, we didn't have any like keynotes. We didn't have any presentations. It was all small group discussions or like individual work where we then worked with each other at our table to really go deeper into help me interrogate how I'm thinking about my business, or help me, brainstorm other ways I could grow, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think the other thing that online versus offline, or like one really important distinction, is a level of vulnerability. I think it's really hard to be vulnerable when you're online or like in that online environment and you're thinking of one-to-many from a scaled perspective. Whereas if you're sitting around, and we do this at a mastermind that we host at Craft and Commerce as well, right? If you're sitting around a table with 8 people, it's so much easier for you to be vulnerable. There's not really an opportunity for that in as many online sort of one-to-many. When I think about that, there's not as many opportunities for that. And I think the vulnerability of people being able to say, like, this is actually a big fear that I have in my business, or a struggle that I'm really working through, there's not nearly as much time to do that.
I completely agree. And I think those repeated offline touch points also create more depth of that vulnerability as well, right? And I want to talk a little bit today about the integration back of that, because I noticed even myself, having been offline, meeting with some people from the lab, now being back online, I feel more connected to them, and there's an integration piece there. One thing I'm curious about, like, I host online events, I guess, through my community, but I've never hosted events or offline experiences to the scale that you have. I'm curious about how you think about like designing them and even deciding whether an experience, I talk about experience a bit broader than event, because I think it is more than an event. An experience should be offline or online or connected. Like, do you start kind of like a product marketer would, like, let's define the customer problem or outcome we're solving for, and then you kind of back into, well, what does this look like? What does programming look like? So tell me just a little bit more about your process and how we should be thinking about it.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm looking for is like, what's the experience that I'm looking for the attendee to have? And then how am I going to accomplish giving them that experience? And often the answer to that might actually be online. Like, I can actually achieve that experience by doing something online. Or the answer might actually be, okay, this is actually going, or needs to be an in-person sort of experience. And so with like Craft and Commerce, for example, we do large scale and small scale events pretty consistently. Or we show up in person to another event, right? And that's a totally different experience that I'm trying to create. But with Craft and Commerce, I'm trying to create an opportunity for other people to connect. My goal is to serve the attendees, and I obsess over their experience. Like, everything from like they walk in, they see sponsors, like there's food, there's cocktails, like what are the chairs like, which, we're going to change that for Craft and Commerce next year, in case you're listening. The chairs weren't so comfortable, but like we obsess over the actual experience of the attendee as they walk in. But to answer your question specifically, I'm looking for like, what do I want the outcome to look like? And then I back into what experience is going to help create that outcome.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, I can attest, having been there, I definitely noticed those little details. Like, I remember even at the welcome party, the fact that like the DJ was a creator resonated so deeply, because I was like, wow, it's like so often these companies, and like I've worked in this space as well before, being a creator, it's like, we say we support creators, but like, do we actually support creators in every little decision we made? And I felt like that kind of showed up. A little detail that you might not have thought of that I noticed, Yeah.
Here's like a really stupid or simple example of this, but it's like, okay, I always say, hey, look, what I'm creating for or optimizing for is human experience and human connection, right? Those hallway sort of conversations. And for our opening party, we used to have this like overly kind of, we'll say just like programmed opening party. And because I think that's what a lot of conferences did. So you're thinking like, we want to do that, or we'd have really loud music, And I remember it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I was just like, turn down the music, turn down the music, turn down the music, because all people wanted to do right when they got there was talk to their friends. And so rather than optimizing for this over-programmed opening and closing party, to be honest, I wanted to optimize for human connection and opportunity. So we had more couches and we had more seating areas, and the music was a little bit lower, and the DJ played for not nearly as long, because I don't think people want to necessarily party. They want to connect with their people. And so we would find that people might leave, let's say the closing party, because the music started way too early and it was too loud. And, they didn't get that final sign off with the people that they had just built all these relationships with. And they were just standing outside at the venue talking because it was too loud inside. And so I think that's, an example of me overly thinking about the experience that I'm trying to create for the attendee.
No, I love that. I think it's one of those things of you always want to leave them wanting more as well, right? So it's how do you have them leave the opening party and be like, oh, I wish this would last longer. I can't wait to come back in the morning and kind of continue. How do you think about creating connection online? Or is that something you ever do think about? If it's a connection-based outcome that you're looking for, is it always the default goes to offline, or how do you balance that?
No, I mean, I think of online, again, one to scale, right? We're thinking one to many. And so we do online events all of the time. And Shiv, who's my co-MC at Craft and Commerce, he's our creator educator internally. And we've run a ton of online sort of educational things, whether it's webinars with partners or whether it's things like for a long time, we ran a series where we were trying to build relationships with people that didn't have an opportunity to connect offline, in order to help promote and encourage creator network connections. And so we were creating these rapid hot seats where people could get connected and they could, meet people from different complementary industries. So that way they could create connections inside of the creator network. And so I think when I think about online versus offline, I mean, there's just so much nuance to it necessarily. And I think the experience for online is more centered around very specific and intentional teaching for the most part. And then again, connection is more something that I think about offline. It was really hard to create, and that was just a lesson that we learned, but it was really hard to create that connection in that environment when we were trying to really build out the creator network, because it's really hard to scale offline, much easier to scale online.
Yeah. And I do think, depending on how it's done, online connection can feel forced sometimes,
100%. 100%.
Nothing more awkward than having to think of an answer to an icebreaker in the moment. And it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Before we dig into a few of the other initiatives you've worked on, because I have some questions about those, just curious about anything else that you think about when thinking about creating a moment that kind of sticks in the minds of attendees, days, weeks, maybe even months after participating in an event. It could be online or offline, or even an event you guys go to. I love that you mentioned that as well.
We had this moment that I really loved in a mastermind that we hosted beforehand with Craft and Commerce with our partners at Ultra Speaking. So Tristan and Michael from Ultra Speaking, who are Tristan Montebello was one of our keynotes, and they did workshops as well. And they led a session in the mastermind, and they actually created this experience, right, where we were playing some live games. They did this in their workshop as well. Did you participate in that workshop by chance?
I did not, unfortunately. No. Okay. There's so many good ones to go to.
There are so many good ones to go to. And the thing about it is that we had a couple of creators come up. Actually, my favorite moment was Tim Grahl. So they're describing this exercise that they're going to have somebody do. And I'm standing off to the side and I see Tim Grahl, who's one of my favorite humans. And he just has this giant smile on his face, super big smile on his face. And they called for a volunteer. And I said, I'm volunteering someone. And I was volunteering Tim Grahl, because the smile, it was just, I was loving it. And he was like, what? And it was a pretty, he's in front of 60 of the biggest creators that are in the room, or 60 or 70 of the biggest creators that are in the room. And he went through this actual exercise. And then we had Thomas Frank, who's a large YouTuber. And then he got up and he did this other exercise where, and I'm blanking on what it was called, maybe the roller coaster or something. Oh, conductor. And they had to increase, and increase their volume based on a number, as far as when they're public speaking.
Yes.
And the actual practice of doing something and then live coaching them through this practice, which is something that's ultimately going to help them become more comfortable with public speaking and engaging their tone and, and whatnot. That was one of those. I can't put my finger on it exactly, but if I had to say the number of people that came up to me to talk about the experience they had with ultra speaking, north of 50.
Wow.
North of 50 people came up to me just to say, they're like, Tristan is like the human form of Xanax. And like I loved that quote. I thought it was amazing. But it was because what they actually taught while they brought somebody up and they were teaching and people were experiencing, they weren't just saying, this is what you should do. And I think that was something that really connected with people.
Yeah, I try to do that in more of the events I'm doing as well. And Justin Moore actually did that in his workshop where Justin Moore's workshop was like how to pitch a sponsorship. And it was stressful in the moment because it was like, who wants to come up? And we had this like calculator, thing that would just create a brand that you needed to pitch for. But
he was playing those sponsor games.
Exactly, the sponsor games. Yes. So, but like that has stuck around in my mind. And there was a few other workshops I went to that haven't stuck around. Not to say they weren't great, but there weren't those sticky moments.
It's really like the actual, what I want for the workshops, right, is that somebody walks away, because at the end of the day, you go to these events and you are flooded with information. Now, what I know is there's a lot of practical things that you learn at an event. The number of notes that I have from events that I've been to where I've never actually implemented some of the things I wanted to implement. So the goal with the workshops, right, are ultimately to actually get something done in some capacity. And maybe that's practicing a thing like the way that Justin Moore facilitated it. Or maybe it's sitting down silently and building a chat GPT or a custom GPT with Jordan, from System Saved Me. And so the actual act of doing something, when you walk away, you're like, I don't have to implement this next week because I've already implemented it then. And I don't know if that answers your question, like what's super memorable about it, but it is something that like you can immediately take away and apply to your, in the weeks following.
I mean, I think how I'm interpreting it and even how I'm processing it as we're speaking is it is more than just listening, right? Like all of the things we've just talked about have been engaging and tangible in some way. And so that is what I'm taking away from this is like create some sort of collaborative experience as part of that event, even if there is a teaching component to the event.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'd love to shift gears just slightly because another project that you also work on and have worked on for a while is Kit Studios, which, maybe people are going to be like, why are we talking about that when we're talking about events? But what brought it to mind for me was I think it's a very important in real life experience that is a continuation of your product and your brand. And so I would love to just hear more about, maybe for the folks who have no idea what we're talking about, what is Kit Studios? And then, what sparked the idea for this?
Yes. Okay. So Kit Studios is essentially a free, fully capable video recording podcast studio that we make accessible to all of our clients. If you're a paying customer, you have access to Kit Studios. And so we have a Boise location, which is kind of our HQ, because Nathan, I also live in Boise, and Nathan, we have his home recording studio there, and that's where we launched. And so we have 5 recording studios, all for different kind of use cases. We have a dual person studio, a group studio, and then we have 2 solo recording studios that are really good for folks that are making a course, or maybe they're recording a podcast like this. So they're dialing in remotely, and they all have teleprompters and the best mics and the best cameras. And it is designed to where you can literally just plug in your computer and hit a single button and you are recording and live. And so that's essentially Kit Studios. We're opening up another one in New York, hopefully in the latter half of the year. And the starting point of it was, in 2018, I remember sitting, we were at our team retreat. We were in Oceanside, California, and Nathan gets up and he always does this company address at our team retreats. As a remote company, we do them twice a year. And, it comes on a slide deck. It's like creator community space or something. And he wanted like a coffee shop, where creators could all come together and do lots of different things. And over the years, that just, I wouldn't say it evolved, but it just kind of dissipated with other things that we were doing. And there wasn't really a clear vision for it before. He knew that being in community with creators was wildly important. And that's Craft and Commerce is an example of that, as that had launched the year prior. And he just wanted a space where creators could spend more time together more often. And it was 2 years ago now, we were in Mexico and we had been looking at real estate, and Nathan says, I was like, all right, Nathan, like, are we going to do this? And he goes, I mean, gosh, I really want to do it, but who's going to do it? And I was like, screw it. I'm going to do it, Nathan. I'm going to do it. Not my job necessarily. But I knew how important it was to the business, like from a branding perspective. I mean, there's so many great elements from a branding perspective, and we can talk about those later. But ultimately, I think as a business, one of my favorite things that we do at Kit is serve our customers and serve even people that aren't, or creators that aren't our customers, is teaching everything that we know and creating these studios allowed creators. There's this moment when we launched Chicago where there was this woman and she was sitting and she sat in this chair and I was like, this is my favorite camera angle. I want you to sit here and then I want you to look up on that screen and see how you look, right? And it was the first time for her in her creator business where she was proud of the way that she was showing up. And we made it so easy and accessible because camera equipment's is expensive. Microphones are expensive. Recording equipment is expensive. The SD cards that you're recording onto are expensive. And, for the first time, she showed up and she looked the way that she wanted to look. And I think that in that moment was the moment where I realized like how incredibly powerful and impactful it was what we were building. So I don't know, that was a long story long, but there you go.
No, I love it. And I think I first heard about Kit Studios on like Nathan's podcast. I was listening and you guys talking about it. And as a product marketer, I was kind of breaking down like, oh, that's interesting. Why do I think they did this? What are the benefits, And one of them is obviously differentiation as well, right? Like, if people are comparing platform to platform, they may be looking for these little benefits of, well, I do have a big course I want to record. I could go in person to do that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what's crazy is that we've had the number of people that we have had fly from across the country to record in Boise for their course. So they'll fly from New York to Boise. They will stay in Boise in a hotel for several days. They will record for, 2 to 3 days straight because the cost is still less expensive than finding a studio in their own city. It also gives them, the ability to like hyper focus on a project. And there's all those other benefits. But the fact that we made it so accessible and so easy, and the cost is still, it's a huge cost for a lot of creators, right? You might be paying $5,000 to $10,000 just to produce a single course. And that is a huge differentiator when people are making decisions from one platform to another platform. And we'll say, especially with the speed of development at feature parity, and I'm not saying that we have feature parity with all of our competitors, but if someone's making a choice and a decision, they're like, hey, I live in New York City. I'm choosing between these two. And there's a Kit Studios that's right around the corner that I get access to for free if I choose Kit. That's a reason in itself, right there.
Totally. I think so too. I currently live in Canada. I'm in Vancouver, but I'm moving to London. And so may I suggest that your next Kit Studios be in London?
I love that you're moving to London. We go there fairly often. I'm going to be back in September. But no, actually, I am constantly pushing for London. We have a huge creator cohort or customer base there. And I'm like, oh, London. I always do user research when I'm there. I'm like, hey, what studios do you go to? And what would you like something like this? And
amazing. Well, we'll have to connect after about London. And that sounds awesome. Okay. One thing I have wondered around Kit Studios is how you're evaluating like the success of it, because I imagine you could go in a couple different directions here. Like, oh, this doesn't need to be profitable at all, or this is just a big brand play or a differentiator. So just walk me through how you and the team think about evaluating the impact of Kit Studios.
Yeah. So we do measure pretty much everything. We measure the number of people that are coming in. We measure all of their feedback that they're coming in. We measure the guests that are coming in that aren't customers. It's a little bit tough because right now in Boise, there's not a massive creator community in Boise, the same way that there are in, let's say, Chicago, New York, or LA, or Austin. And Chicago's still in a soft launch, and that's because the building itself isn't completely completed. And so we were just waiting on things like the elevator to be done, and stuff like that. But no, we track and pretty much measure everything. Having said that, we are lucky in that we don't make our money through the podcast studio, and we aren't planning on, we're never going to charge for it. And so we don't have to rely on the studio making money to measure whether or not it's successful or not. It's mostly usage. The more we can get people in there, is we want to, just from a real estate perspective and a cost perspective, we want to make sure that it's being utilized. And if it's being utilized, then we're winning. And so that's the number one metric. And if it's being utilized quite frankly, I don't even think that I've received a single piece of, I don't think I've received a single piece of critical feedback when it comes to the studios. Actually, at Craft and Commerce, we had one gal, she says, it almost seems like you're trying to hide this from us. Like the fact that you have this, like you don't market this enough. And I was like, I feel like we're talking about it all the time. Are we not? And she was just like, I had no idea how insanely valuable it actually was. So the primary metric is usage.
I love that. I think that makes sense. And I do think, to the marketing thing, this is something I constantly remind myself of. Like, we do need to say things over and over again because people don't hear it, and people want to hear it, especially when it's like a value add message like that, right? It's not like you're saying, oh, you have to pay to come here. It's like, come use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I'll also say one of my other favorite parts about it is that it is Taylor Swift themed, if I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong at all. In fact, every single one of our songs. So Nathan, our CEO, as many people know, is literally the biggest Taylor Swift fan of all time. I mean, I'm a mega Taylor Swift fan as well, but like Nathan is like massive, right? And for a mid-30s dude, that's pretty funny. So all of the podcast studios are named after a favorite Taylor Swift song, or the feeling, like you go into it, it's the feeling, so yeah.
I love that so much. Yeah. Big Taylor Swift fan as well. I went to 2 Eras shows during,
love that.
Had to. Okay, I want us to zoom out just a little bit as we're kind of coming towards the end of our convo. And I'm just curious about your perspective on if so, how do you make sure that these offline experiences that you're creating, whether it's the conference or Kit Studios, feel like a natural extension of your product, which is the software itself?
I would say, I don't know if I think about that all that often in full transparency. And that's because for offline, I really don't focus. We do a lot of teaching, right? So we do a lot of mastermind sort of events and things like that. But my goal for it is truly connection. My goal is truly to connect with the people that are using, is to build deeper relationships. We did a bunch of studies a while ago, asking like, why is it that people are most connected to Kit? And most like choosing Kit as a brand. And actually the biggest extension was Nathan, is that, they were connected to Nathan and his story of him being a creator, like by creators for creators, right? Him launching Kit as a creator. And so when I think about just being offline, and I think about like how we serve customers, we do teach about the creator economy, or like, let's say we'll zoom out, and we don't actually teach, if we're doing a small mastermind, we don't teach, this is how you create tags and segments and so on and so forth. We might say, this is how James Clear got 10,000 reviews. And this is the flywheel that he actually built in order to do that. And a very small component or focus on that actually might be on the kit software itself, but it's really the creator business as a whole. And we're just the kind of like ecosystem at the middle and the center of that. We don't do a lot of like major teaching, like digging into the technology at offline events. It is more like, how can we provide a more roundabout value and not have it feel so salesy, if I'm being totally honest, because all that stuff can be done online. There are things that cannot be done offline. And so I don't think about that as much. I think about providing different types of value for offline experiences.
No, I really respect that. And I think, again, putting my product marketer hat back on, it's like, okay, when I look at a customer segment, I recognize there's a variety of problems that need to be solved for them. The product solves some of those problems, but then there's others, like some that you mentioned, like, wow, I want to be inspired as a creator, or I want to know like how to do things beyond my email tool that are important and part of that journey. And I think it is worth recognizing that the same way different parts of your product solve different problems for the end customer, so can different parts of your brand experiences as well, right? They don't all have to solve the same one.
Yeah. The other thing too is that from an offline perspective, a lot of times what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to like create opportunities for people to make connections. And so I feel like it's really narrow-minded to come in and if I'm tied, regardless of creator type, it's really narrow-minded to just be like, email is going to solve all of your problems, because it's just not, right? And so even if you look at your business, you're saying like, okay, I've got a community platform and I've got email and I've got social media. And it's really hard for me to just say like, this is what you need to do with email without thinking about all of the other things. And so if I just narrow in just on email, then I'm leaving so much out there on the table to really allow me to serve like creators the best way that I possibly can, or just one small sliver of it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, and we like to end every episode of the Marketing Millennials with one question, which is, Haley, what is one marketing hill that you would die on?
Oof. Okay. I love this question. I thought about this a lot beforehand. So I would say this. So many marketers focus when they think about events, they're like, is it really valuable? Should we do this? It's so hard to prove. What are the number of accounts that we got and we closed, and how are we going to measure this? And, I go to events for 3 reasons. I go for client retention, I go for client acquisition, and brand awareness. And I might go for all 3 to a single event, or I might choose to go to one event for only one of them, right? And so let's say, for sake of argument, I go to a food content creator event, right? And I have a handful of competitors that we really compete against in that specific market segment. I can go to that event only for client retention and say, if I can save 5 customers, right? Or 5 people, because if I didn't show up, right? And there was another booth of a competitor, for example, that's there, and they get 30 attendees to show up, and then they convert 30%, right? That cost alone right there could essentially cover my entire event budget, or the cost or the value reason for me attending that event. And so I'd really encourage people that are creating or like, let's say, sponsoring events or creating in-person experiences to stop focusing only on new client acquisition, but focus on retention as well. I think it's a huge reason that we should be going to conferences, is the relationships with our customers and not just, net new MRR.
I love it. That's a great one. Haven't heard that one before on the show. So
there you go.
So Haley, where can folks learn more about you, maybe learn more about Kit, follow along with your journey?
Yeah, you can go to kit.com for all things Kit. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Haley Janiczek, or maybe Instagram at Haley Jani. And I'm trying to show up more on LinkedIn, as are the rest of the creators in the world. So I would say probably there or Instagram.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.